Today we're looking at Fujifilm's flagship super zoom. This is the Fujifilm Finepix HS20 EXR, and it picks up where the HS10 left off last year. After spending some quality time with the HS20 EXR, it became apparent that this is a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type camera. On one hand, the camera is exceedingly useful and precise to an exacting science. However, on the other hand, it exhibits some crucial detriments that make it far less enjoyable to shoot with this big monster. We're going to start with the Dr. Jekyll and then show you the Mr. Hyde. The big pomp and circumstance engulfing this camera this year is its EXR technology. Fujifilm crammed a brand new half-inch 16 megapixel back illuminated EXR CMOS sensor in the HS20 EXR. And that's a significant difference compared to last year's 10 megapixel 1/2.3 inch CMOS chip. The good news with the Finepix HS20 EXR, and probably the most important anyway, was its image quality. This camera produced some of the best image quality in its class, in its price range, hands down. In low light, it beat out the Canon PowerShot SX30 IS and Panasonic Lumix DMC FZ40. And this camera's other golden ticket was its manual controls. It has a shutter speed that goes down to 30 seconds with bulb. It has an ISO that is capable of shooting up to 12,800. This camera has a versatile white balance range. It has auto exposure bracketing, and all of the manual controls are easily accessible via the buttons and control configuration on the body of the camera. We have a panel of ISO, auto exposure, focus, white balance buttons that can all be toggled with the control dial located next to the mode dial. We also have a 3-inch fold-out LCD that has a 460,000 pixel display, and that's a boost from last year's 230K display. The HS20 EXR carries over the pop-up flash, the hot shoe, and we also get a AA battery power source as well, but the battery life on this camera, even with alkalines, was actually fairly sustainable. It lasted a few days of shooting with videos and pictures. While we have a robust fleet of manual controls, we have EXR mode, and that means the EXR sensor will shift depending on the shooting environment. We could shoot at dynamic range, high sensitivity, or high resolution priority. We could also adjust the dynamic range from 100 to 400%. Fujifilm also included the advanced shooting modes, Pro Low Light and Pro Focus. Pro Low Light combines 4 shots. It's basically like an HDR, only with high sensitivity. And Pro Focus provides a shallow aperture so as to blur the background artistically. Aside from that, the camera has a gaggle of scene modes, and we also get a 360-degree panorama sweep mode, and the panorama mode worked very well with this camera. So to sum up Dr. Jekyll, we have some of the best image quality, still image quality, in this price range and class, and also the best manual control suite you could pretty much ask from a super zoom at this stage. But now it's time for Mr. Hyde to rear his ugly head. These are the detriments that made our shooting experience far less enjoyable. We'll start with the electronic image stabilization, which was exceedingly subpar, especially at full 30x optical zoom. The frame was more jittery than a kindergartner on a pixie sticks binge, and we even experienced frame wave, which is highly amateurish. Couple that with a zoom control that is jumpy and not refined, and we were never able to zoom in smoothly on any subject. Furthermore, the continuous autofocus had a bad case of ADD and had trouble locking on its target. It kept wandering all over the frame, and it was highly disappointing. Also, the manual focus was very jumpy. All of a sudden it would just leap up to a sharper focus or dip down to a lower focus. Lastly, the Fujifilm Finepix HS20 EXR, its menu system was a bit sluggish. At times it could be very quick when you're rifling through controls. However, there's a significant lag time after you capture an image, especially in RAW mode. And in playback mode, this camera rivals a jar of molasses in a freezer. A lot of these Mr. Hyde characteristics are devastating in video mode and render it fairly useless. Aside from that, the 1080p 30 frames per second video that this camera is capable of taking is really not that great compared to the Canon PowerShot SX30 IS and especially the FZ40 from Panasonic. So our InfoSync diagnosis with the Fujifilm Finepix HS20 EXR is strewn amidst a sea of consternation. On one hand, Dr. Jekyll gives us stellar image quality, and a robust suite of manual controls. On the other hand, Mr. Hyde gives us a jumpy zoom control, inadequate electronic image stabilization, jerky manual focus, hyperactive continuous autofocus, and certain menus that fall asleep at the wheel. The Fujifilm Finepix HS20 EXR could easily have been the top super zoom in its class if Fujifilm had addressed the concerns we had in the HS10 review, but they didn't. So they're going to have to pay attention to this review and make amendments to this camera in order to get it to the top. You're almost there, you can do it. This camera is so darn close. The image quality is great, the manual controls are great, but it's so frustrating to shoot with the camera that has such a heavy concentration of ailments mentioned in this review. So this is what I think. If your prime concern is still image quality and you want the best in manual controls, then the Fujifilm Finepix HS20 EXR is definitely a camera for you. However, if you want the overall package, if you want good hardware, if you want a quick camera, you're not going to get it with this camera, especially in video mode. It's got one of the worst video modes on the market. Look to the Canon PowerShot SX30 IS or Panasonic Lumix DMC40 before you go for an HS20. But for still image quality's sake, this is the camera to go for. It's a tough one, it always is in this class, and if you want further analysis with full image samples and videos, then go to infosyncworld.com for the full review on the Fujifilm Finepix HS20 EXR. Until next time, I'm Mike Perlman for InfoSync World.